I'm not going to go through Petrea's bio again, for whatever reason my printer cut it off. But I just want to say a few words about the topic and Petrea. I just met Petrea about a month and a half ago. So part of this event, results event, is really about showcasing research, different types of research, innovative research, as well as doing some education, because that is Rosella's mandate, is both research and education. I was at a conference, an international conference, at the end of August of this year, and I was at a presentation where there was a presenter from the UK, and the presenter was talking about some research they were doing about the high rates of suicide amongst women with histories of intimate partner violence. In fact, according to their research, there are more women who take their own lives than who are killed by their domestic partner. I thought that was staggering. In the United Kingdom, they're estimating at least 10 to 11 women kill themselves to escape domestic violence per week. If we look at Canadian statistics, one woman every week is killed by her domestic partner, her spouse or ex-spouse. If we look at the similar rates of suicide, similar to the United Kingdom, we're looking at 3 or 4 women killing themselves per week with extensive histories of intimate partner violence. And I was shocked by that. Very few people are talking about this. I've been a researcher for many, many years and part of national projects, and no one is talking about this. So I want to kind of explore this further. I had the pleasure of meeting Petrea at a conference in Fredericton in October, I guess it was. And Petrea's research is looking at women's experiences with suicidality, thoughts of suicide, and histories of intimate partner violence. So I thought people need to hear this. Petrea is very, very passionate and has lots of experience. She can say a little bit more about her background, but she's a psychiatric nurse, was a postdoc and did this research, but now, I think as of last month, an assistant professor in Moncton. So with that, I'm going to hand it over and help you welcome Petrea Taylor. Thank you.
It's always there in the back of my mind. It keeps me safe when things unravel. It's my out, it's my only option. It's a strange, soothing comfort. I'm in a cocoon, isolated, but it keeps me company. Nothing else matters. I watch how others watch me. They're scared. They come to me asking me if I'm okay, if there's anything they can do. They look so helpless. Because I'm in a tunnel, a deep, dark well. And they're only images, echoes. They stand right next to me, but they're so far away. They look at me, but they're only looking at the shell of me. I'm trapped, and I'm screaming in my head. I can't get it out. I can't reach out. They beg me to get it out of my mind, but they wouldn't ask this of me if they knew the utter chaos that would ensue if I didn't have it. I have to protect them from this chaos. I'll just slip away, and they can move on with their lives. I'll wait for them to turn away. I can't stand the pain in their eyes. But when they turn away, I feel rejected. I'm now more alone, crushed. As they turn away, I turn to it, my soothing comfort. I lean on it in hopes to escape this unbearable pain. What do you think this woman is talking about? Are you thinking it's drugs? An eating disorder? When you starve, it's really great to get that high of starving or exercising to escape. Is it alcohol? Gambling? Well, in this case, it's the appeal of suicide, knowing that there's hope that the pain will end. This is a picture that one woman took of what it means for her. She attempted to overdose on these exact pills. Her prescribed pills that she had stashed away, knowing she could use them to attempt suicide. And you know this woman. You have responded to her domestic violence call, helped to collect her things when leaving an abusive relationship, helped her fill out a social development form, sat with her on the bus, you sat next to her in church. Maybe she's your family member. Maybe she's you. So, hello. I'm from New Brunswick, and I'm very, very happy to be with you today. I want to acknowledge my standpoint. I'm a person who comes from a background that is fairly homogeneous, so when I talk about all of my research and all of these experiences from the women I've talked to, I don't proclaim that I'm talking for everybody and all the diversity that we have in our world. I want to be a good listener, and if you have questions at the end or during and even afterwards, I would love to hear your perspective. What I'm talking about you can use in your work, and if it doesn't relate, then you won't be using it in your work. So a part of this standpoint, I'm very, very humbled to say that I don't represent all groups of people, and I want to recognize that we are on Treaty 1 lands, and it's very, I recognize that what I'm talking about is from a European kind of ancestry. In New Brunswick, we're very homogeneous, kind of French Canadian and English Canadian, and that I don't represent all Canadians here. I met this lovely woman today, and she helped me to learn the word tanse, meaning glow. So I'm very, very happy to be here with you. So what we're going to be talking about for the next hour, we're going to look at some of the statistics to help frame what we're talking about. We're going to hear from women's voices. I'm going to review the findings of one of my studies, and maybe another one at the end. And then we're going to talk about how this relates to your work. And we're going to talk about actual interventions from a tool that I'll show you at the end to see that if it might relate to some of the work you're doing. And I hope to get a stretch in there because it's going to be the end of the day and you've been sitting for a long time and it's really important to take care of ourselves. All right, so let's gain some perspective on the issue of suicide in IPV. Kendra really helped us understand the importance of suicide deaths. So let's look at Manitoba. In Manitoba, 3.59 per 100,000 people die of IPV homicide. And we know that most of these deaths are women. So, homicide is very serious. But let's take a look at suicide deaths in comparison. 5.3 per 100,000 women in Manitoba die by suicide. So this isn't men and women, that's women only. So in the UK, Walby, 2004, estimated that IPV accounted for 34% of suicide deaths in United Kingdom women. So that means that IPV related to their suicidality in some way. Okay, so suicide deaths are obviously tragic, but counting the number of people who die as a result of suicidality doesn't really give us the whole scope of the problem. So when we look at, for comparison's sake, let's look at what we understand about IPV. We know that what we see is usually only the tip of the iceberg. So we see physical abuse, we see the screaming, bruises, strangulation, scratches, homicide. But you know more than anybody that there is more to the picture underneath. It's all about power and control and fear. The abuse, emotional, verbal, sexual, financial, gender inequalities, isolation, worthlessness, health problems, and all kinds of social determinants like Canadian history of colonialism and gender issues, like I said, poverty, all these things that sometimes we forget in the medical model where I come from. And then we hear stigma, like, you're too sensitive, why don't you just leave? You didn't say no, so does it count as sexual assault, and so on. So you know this, I'm preaching to the choir here. So just like that, we can look at suicide the same way. So for example, suicide deaths for both men and women is 16 per 100,000 people in Manitoba. The Canadian-wide number is 11.4. However, look at the bigger picture underneath the surface. Suicidal thoughts account for 110 per 100,000 population in Manitoba. So again, suicide death is very tragic. However, suicide statistics, as we know them, do not show us the larger picture. It's only the tip of the iceberg. So we're not just, when I talk about suicidality, we're not just talking about preventing deaths, we're talking about helping people with these awful thoughts that they have. Women who have experienced IPV. So the extent of suicide is shown in suicide attempts, suicide self-injury, suicide rehearsal, which means kind of taking actions that prepare for suicide, but it's not actually an attempt, like loading the gun, putting it up to your head, and not pulling the trigger, making sure the noose fits, and so on. Okay, so by the way, if you've noticed that suicide deaths, it's 16 per 100,000 population. That's way higher than the women's deaths. On the previous slide, it was 5.3. That's because men die by suicide about 3 times more than women do. However, women more frequently report suicidal thoughts in comparison to men in Canada and Manitoba. And they're hospitalized more often for self-inflicted injury in comparison to men in Canada. So the tip of the iceberg is also a metaphor that illuminates that these statistics underestimate the real problem as well, because we know that how can we possibly capture suicide thoughts with people, or self-injury, or suicide attempts? So this is highly underestimated, just like IPV is highly underestimated. Okay, so let's look at the IPV and suicide link. Just a couple of studies that are very recent. 24% of callers to a UK national IPV hotline had suicidal thoughts. So this was either recently or in the past. Same kind of numbers. 30% of South African women who had emotional and economic IPV, not physical, had suicide thoughts in the past month. And more closer to home, 20% of women in an Alabama domestic violence shelter had thoughts of suicide in the past 2 days. So this is basically, 1 out of every 5 women you work with are going to be living with these thoughts. And that, again, is very underestimated. Okay, so a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to show you pictures of women who took pictures that represent how they sought help for suicidality. And it is their actual pictures. And I have a lot of quotes taken from them, anonymous of course. So this study, I interviewed 32 women from rural and urban places in New Brunswick. Most of them were Caucasian, and a couple people were French Canadian, and one woman identified as Asian Canadian. And I did interviews, but 7 of them, we did a photo voice group, which is where the photos come from. They took pictures that represented their help-seeking experience. And then I used a grounded theory analysis, which generates theory through constant comparisons of the data that raises the level of descriptions to an abstract level. So it's like, the Kubler-Ross theory of dying, when you have denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance. It's kind of like that, except it shows a process of how people manage basic psychological or social trauma. Okay, so let's get into it. So, why don't we hear about suicide more often? Why is it hidden? Well, I've been learning a lot from women, and this is one quote from one woman. I don't think I ever talked about suicide, being suicidal when I was suicidal. If that makes sense. You don't want to admit it because there's stigma of it. You don't want to admit you were that bad. And also, another woman said, what if they think I'm in danger? What if I go too far and say that I'm thinking of suicide and they put me in the psychiatric ward? And that means I can't go to work. And that means they will call my next of kin, and that means my mom will find out. There's a lot of stigma. Also, if the woman is a mother, I'm sure you know this, my doctor and I had a little kerfuffle a while ago. He thought that I should be admitted to the psychiatric unit. I thought, if I do that, I'm going to lose my daughter, and she's the only reason why I haven't killed myself already. So a lot of times, we keep these things to ourselves. I'm going to tell you, no problem, that I broke my leg when I was 15, but I'm not going to really feel as comfortable talking to you about how I'm in therapy. It's just still the stigma we have going on. So when we think about suicidality, what is it actually? And if we can really understand what it is, then we'll feel more comfortable listening and talking about it. So, like again, we have the suicide deaths at the tip of the iceberg. And just like we ought never to minimize IPV homicides or disregard violent actions within an intimate relationship or minimize the negative outcomes of IPV, we would be short-sighted in putting women at risk by only paying attention to suicide deaths. So this will be missing the bigger point. So we want to also look at suicide experience. So this includes the feelings of hopelessness and despair. If women you're working with feel this way, they probably had a suicide thought in the past. Feelings of worthlessness, isolated, disconnected. And then you get the stigma, the kind of narrative, suicide is selfish. She's a mother. How could she do that to her kids? But you have so much to live for. Really invalidating stuff. So a lot of the times, they may have thoughts to escape, preoccupation with death, some self-harm, but it's not mutually exclusive. Sometimes self-harm isn't necessarily that they have the intent to die, but it's used as a coping mechanism. They feel, like I said, hopeless, attempting suicide, and they have to manage each day feeling like this. They could look just as well presented as I do today. Well, I don't know. I didn't really brush my hair, but, they could look just like any one of us and still have suicidal thoughts. You can be a person who's going to work, taking care of your kids, and doing all of these very functional things and still have these thoughts. So we're not just looking to prevent immediate death, but helping people with these very disturbing thoughts. Okay, so this is a picture of a woman who basically said this is what suicidality is like for her. This woman's picture is the bottom of what used to be a lake in Moncton, actually, revealing the extent of the harmful consequences of not getting the help she needed when she was suicidal. This woman has many suicide attempts. She wrote about this photo in her journal, quote, "This is a dried up lake. It represents how drained I was, how exhausted I was from dealing with things on my own." So this is suicidality. It's not just the death. Another meaning of suicide, as one woman called it, a break from life, an answer to her problems. I was just trying to kill myself, I just wanted the pain to end. So I would do drugs after drugs after drugs. This was, she was using drugs recreationally, and so sometimes it's an ambivalent, sometimes it's not, I want to kill myself and I'm going to do it today. Sometimes it's just, well, I just want to do these drugs to help me cope, and if I die, well, good. So that's also included in suicidality. Suicide, like I said, is very ambivalent. A lot of the times people are judged for being manipulative if their suicide attempt wasn't lethal. Well, they didn't really mean it, they only took a handful of Tylenol. But if they believed that it was lethal, then it counts. So, in this study, what really came through was the sense of being trapped. And this is not new for IPV, feeling of the power and control, feeling trapped in the relationship. But guess what? Entrapment really existed through the experience of being suicidal and getting home. So, just to get the ground started to frame what entrapment is, this is basically feeling stuck and out of control. A feeling of dehumanization, a feeling of not fully being human, not belonging in this world. So let's look at the different kinds. Abuser entrapment. This is a picture of a woman from the study. She said, so I'm going to get back to the suicidality, but let's talk about abuser entrapment first. Jane, not her real name, demonstrates the level of fear and violence related to her abuser entrapment in her photo of a knife. This is the weapon her abuser used to control her. This actual knife. That's a picture of the knife, and that was the same knife that my ex-husband had threw at me the last day that we were in our house, and I just have a feeling of wind right beside my head. He could have killed me. So you're well aware of what being trapped in an IPV relationship, no access to money perhaps, losing a sense of self, not being able to be self-determined. And obviously, that's very dehumanizing. Abuse or entrapment is also related to an accumulation of past trauma, maybe social issues, but the crux of it being the IPV violence. So, just like being trapped in an abusive relationship, feeling suicidal also is feeling of being trapped. And what it is from the women I talked to is trauma entrapment. Basically, all the trauma that is accumulated makes them feel that they're stuck in this post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, debilitating anxiety, whatever it is. When you have depression, your body doesn't work as well. It's a brain disease. So the brain is supposed to send signals to our body to move. One woman described it as, I'm sitting there in my chair and I'm looking at the dishes, but I can't get up. I can't do them. I want to do them, and I can't get up. So it's a very, very physical thing too. So they can be trapped in so many ways. So abuse or entrapment is the biggest reason for trauma entrapment in this context of the theory that I'm talking about. So one woman says, I felt frustrated. I felt sick of living, just frustrated, feeling this way every single day. I feel trapped in my own body. So, trauma entrapment is being stuck in suicidality. It's feeling worthless, feeling like they do not deserve help. It's a low sense of belonging. You feel like a burden. It's not selfish. If I kill myself, I'm doing the world a favor. I'm doing my kids a favor. I'm a burden to my family. So it has to do with depression, anxiety, PTSD. And like I said, it's a physical thing. It's problems with sleep, memory, attention, energy, ability to enjoy yourself, ability to move, ability to be motivated. Depression and anxiety and all these mental illnesses isn't just about being sad. It's not about crying. It's a real brain illness that prevents you from being able to function sometimes. An example of a woman, this first woman I talked to in this study, I can still hear her voice in my head. Just to give an example of the worthlessness, which I know you've heard, but let's really kind of draw attention to it in terms of the suicide lens. I'm a piece of shit. I'm a failure as a human being. I've given myself countless black eyes, bruises, pulled my hair out, put my head through walls. That wasn't enough. I heard people cutting themselves, so I would slash my stomach and my arms and my legs, just doing things I never did. It's really important for us to really get a feeling of what they go through. Because when we're on the run, when we're in the hospital, when we're providing service in the community, sometimes we're tired and we've got our own bad days, and sometimes it's easy to miss these signs. People aren't always going to say to us, I feel suicidal. Some people think the word suicidal just means homicide, because for years it was considered a sin, well, decades, centuries, and then it was illegal. So, it's really important to look for these signs. Another woman, she talks about how trauma, suicidality, and IPV go together. It's almost like you're in a pit of quicksand. The harder you struggle to try to get out of it, the worse it's going to get. And you don't want to suffocate in the sand, so suicide's your only option to save yourself, because there's no other way out. So, what happens when women seek help? If we can understand how they seek help, we can help them seek help better. That's how it works. So, let's review. Women feel trapped in an abusive relationship, feel trapped for the consequences of the abusive relationship, aka suicidality. So while they're suicidal, what happens when they seek help for suicidality? They hit a brick wall. This is how one woman described what it felt like entering the emergency department after she disclosed her suicidality to a police officer on the street, when she said she had thoughts of harming herself. This is how she described it. So, entrapment, we've got abusive relationship entrapment, suicidality entrapment, and the healthcare system entrapment. So this is what we're going to be talking about a lot for the next, until the end. And you know, I'm a part of this. I'm a psych nurse. We do good work, but sometimes we miss the boat. Institutions, you know, you go there when you're going to die, they do a really good job at saving your life. But sometimes they don't have all the resources to do it right for other things. You know, I'm learning our system is fragmented. Before I did my dissertation, I was a part of a team that didn't really look at domestic violence in the women who were coming through our doors for depression. We're going to give her ECT, you know, and send her on her way. Well, what about what she said about her husband? No, it doesn't matter. You know, let's just look at the biology and that's it. So I was really guilty of really kind of not looking at the bigger picture. So this is how it looks like altogether. You've got abuser entrapment relating to the suicidality, and then when you're trying to get help, sometimes it just adds to the entrapment. It overlaps. But they also get help too. But overall, this was the large majority of the experience. So, system entrapment is dehumanization when getting help. The devaluation of personal worth and low sense of belonging. So, what causes system entrapment? Invalidation. So this is kind of like feeling that you aren't being heard, you're not being taken seriously. Or feeling judged. One woman took a picture of the gavel, and she explained it by saying, quote, "I feel like the service providers are going to look at me through a magnifying glass." Oh, no, that's another one. Okay, she also had a picture of a magnifying glass that I didn't bring today, but it's the same theme. So she said, "I felt like they're going to look at me through a magnifying glass, which would just make me look more broken, and they'd find my faults, and I couldn't face that." This metaphor symbolizes the fear of being shamed by being analyzed and critiqued while seeking help. I can't function, I want to kill myself, I know I shouldn't, they feel, but so when you come in, it's like, okay, what's wrong? Let's figure out what's wrong. And they find that embarrassing. Well, what's wrong with the world that brought you to this place? What's wrong with the people who've abused you? We don't always ask that question. So the judgment, the stigma of suicide, mental illness, not leaving an abusive partner, you know, why don't you just leave? Gender intersex here, you know, women are seen as very emotional. Men in the past have been seen as the rational ones, and we're embarrassed sometimes to cry. Men and women, of course. In Western society, you know, we are considered to be overly emotional if we scream and cry and show our emotions. We're always kind of taught to be independent, do it yourself, be strong. And all these things get in the way of attempting suicide and crying and railing and doing whatever you need to do to grieve whatever you've been through. This is a woman's family member covering her ears and closing her eyes, depicting someone who responds to her reaching out for help for suicidal thoughts. "I can't hear you, I can't hear you." This is exactly how she felt when she told a family member that she was thinking of suicide. Another detour sign, self-explanatory. One person described it, not the one who took this picture, but another person described it as, I was like, what do you do? What do you see? It's just hard again. It's like the stigma. And not knowing, like I said, it's not knowing how to access mental health. Like, who do I call? Like I said, I didn't know that there was a mobile health crisis unit. This person was really well educated. This person actually was helping out a certain politician in our local area. So, what do women need? How do they get there? Going back to the theory of this research, hunting to feel human. This is what it's all about. First, we're going to talk about the goal of help seeking, and then we're going to talk about how women go about doing it. So, the goal is to feel human. So, we've already discussed the system entrapment caused by invalidation, the detours, the judgment, the not taking persons seriously, judging them for being overly emotional. You didn't really mean it if you didn't really die. If you would have cut yourself this way and not this way if you really wanted to die, and so on and so on, all these judgments. So, just like invalidation makes a person feel dehumanized, validation helps them to feel human. One woman describes feeling human like, she says, it's about the heart of the person. That's the real deal, what you're seeing, the absolute, utter worst of the person, and that's where all your emotions and feelings and everything, that's probably where you're gonna deal with people as a nurse. And that is where you are seeing, the real part of the human spirit. And this is when she was talking about suicidality, mental health issues. So feeling human has to do with having self-worth, sense of belonging, agency, and we get it through empathy, by being believed, unconditional acceptance, and being taken seriously. These things sound like simple Simon. Why do we have a kindergarten teacher telling us to be nice? It's because these things aren't being done a lot of the times in the system when people are suicidal. It's easy to say be nice, don't judge, take them seriously. But what if they're pressing your buttons? What if you really believe that, they're attempting suicide just so that you won't close their file? We've all got buttons. Where are your buttons? So being empathetic is about knowing our buttons so that we won't end up judging because we're pissed off, because a lot of the times the people we help, it's really hard. So what about us, our past, relates to how we think about the people we help? As a nurse, we work in the hospital, and we would leave our shift at 7:30, and that's when suicide attempts would occur. And that would make a lot of us angry. 12-hour shifts, we're exhausted, we want to go back to our families. So people would say, oh, she's just doing that so I won't leave. Well, is it possible that she's seeking to be validated? She's feeling abandoned by us leaving. Maybe we don't understand it, but this is all about helping us understand it a bit better. Feeling human has to do with a shared personhood. Me as a nurse, I'm not supposed to accept gifts. I'm not supposed to share my deepest, darkest secrets with my clients, but can we somehow take our professional hat off and relate to the person as a person? Just plain Jane genuineness. As you know, people who've gone through trauma through their lives as children, they've had to figure out to read nonverbal communication. They're experts at that. They can see if you're breathing differently. They can see the twitch in your eye that might mean you're a little frustrated. So it's our job to have self-reflection so that we know how we seem. We know what might be pressing our buttons. I can take a deep belly breath and say, okay, what's going on? But if it's not genuine, they'll be able to sense it. Bless you. And they will sense entrapment just by that small thing. But if we show the genuineness, that is suicide prevention. And I know it sounds so simple, and I swear to you, the more I study this, the more it isn't simple. Which is brilliant, because yay, we know how to help people through this. That's great news. One woman talks about being taken seriously. She said, it was so relieving once I was being listened to. It was like a breath of fresh air. It was like, oh my God, someone is finally going to help me after all this time, argument, and struggle. Her humanity was validated. I think she was pulling out her hair. It's called trichotillomania, slides off the tongue. And they gave her some medication to help her with this, and she was taken seriously. She, it's these little things. She was being abused by her partner and being stalked and so on. So this was years after, the trauma lasts for years, of course. Unconditional acceptance or not being judged. Are we ready to accept that they want to kill themselves? That's a tough one. You guys, we are good, if we work in IPV, domestic violence, we're good at knowing that you can't just leave the abusive partner just like that. You leave, your chance for being killed is going to increase. So you guys are out there telling the public, lay off, this is serious business. So I'm here talking about, and not everyone would agree with me in mental health, that can we accept that they want to die without shipping them to ER immediately because you gotta save your butt? Are we ready to listen to all the reasons for dying? Are we willing to kind of want to have them expand on the reasons for dying? And not telling them, oh, but you have so much to live for. Oh, but what about your cat at home? You know, how comfortable are we with the topic of death? And the beautiful irony is when you allow, that's such a patriarchal word, when we invite opportunities to talk about reasons for dying, then they don't feel like dying anymore. That's the irony. This is one woman's picture when she was talking about, you know, how do you seek help? What does feeling human look like? This is a picture of her cat. This is what keeps her alive. These are big things. The validation received from her, a beloved pet, feeling human, a sense of understanding and acceptance. She feels accepted by her cat, so she was communicating to me as a nurse, that's what you guys gotta do. Be more like your freaking cat. You know, be more accepting. To teach women how important they are. To not be clumped all together in one category in the system. Listening and taking it seriously what you're saying, and this is going on inside of you and you're looking for help. And to act like you're at the same level as the woman.
So a few years back, like prior to my diagnosis and everything.
Do you want what you have to say is very important.
So prior to my diagnosis, I'm also a single mom. And I was going through a lot of mental health challenges, and I went in being like, I need to be like put like at a bed, like I need to, like I'm not safe for myself anymore. And they had no spaces. Even when I went in asking to go through the unit, they were like, no, sorry, there's like wait list. The nurse practitioner that talked to me when this was happening, like really, really validated. Like at first, everyone was like you came in with a health problem, not a psych problem, so we're going to focus on health, not psych, which was super frustrating. But then they sent down a psych nurse, and one of the things that she had said that like helped me so much was she like referred to the whole like when you're on a plane, whose mask do you put on first? You put your own on, and then you put your kids on. And that was like huge for me because I was always saying like, I'm here because I can't leave her, she can't be without me. But when my suicide ideology gets really bad and I start telling myself she's better off, that like her words, they just constantly are like going through my head. So I thought that was like, yeah, I was validating, but it was also like, she gets where I'm coming from, and that was really important for my path. Anyway, I want to share that.
Okay, so the presentation's over because you just summed it all up. That's true. That's exactly what it's all about. You are important. Anybody else want to ask a question at this time? Oh, yes.
I didn't want to ask a question, but I just wanted to make a comment. And thank you for sharing that in your personal story.
Would you like, I'm going to go do the Oprah thing.
Okay, thanks for your work. I know you're still not done yet.
Oh.
Thank you for sharing your personal story. That takes a certain amount of courage, I think, and so I appreciate you sharing that. And I think the reason I appreciate it the most is sometimes I'm a nurse, and I've been a nurse educator and researcher, and sometimes the problem, the systems you work in, you think, what can I do? Because I'm just this little person in there. But those words that that person shared with you obviously made an impact. And I love hearing those kind of stories because they make you think, okay, so maybe I can't change the government policy, but who I am within this relationship can make a difference. And I can think sometimes, I can draw probably some sentences that people said to me that they never thought was going to be really important, but was helpful to me, and I've drawn them. So I really appreciate you saying that.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Oh, I meant to start my presentation by saying, basically my presentation could be summed up by your last slide. Yeah, and so she just reminded me of that, exactly, yeah.
I just think that my last slide is that nurse participated in your personal journey by saying what she did to you. So that goes back to what I'm saying, of what we say or do, like whether we know it or not, and it changes their trajectory, right?
And just one thing, Abraham Maslow said that in a beautiful way. I can't remember the quote, but basically had, what was he, the hierarchy of
Needs, yeah.
whatever, yeah. Anyway, but he said something very eloquently, that whatever words you share either are healing words or else they are contributors to psychopathology. And your slide made me think of that. If I find it, I'll send it to you.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It is.
A lot of what I'm talking about isn't black and white. It isn't this is how you help people. It's all about reflection, and you guys already know how to help people. So this is just sharing, and your reflection is key to this. So I really appreciate taking this time. I'm gonna absolutely cut about 20 slides off of this presentation. I am, seriously, I've already figured it out. Does anybody else want to participate at this time? We'll make time again. Okay. Cats scare me a little bit when they hiss. I freak out, but I appreciate that, people, who love their cats, that would be a big deal. Me, I like my dogs. Okay, so we've talked about system entrapment. We've talked about feeling human versus dehumanization. So how do they get there? It's through hunting. I've been criticized a few times from academics by using the word hunting. I am actually underestimating the veracity of how women describe how they get help. Hunting almost doesn't capture it. It's not they're out to kill somebody, but it is about this kind of need to find what they need to live. We're talking about life and death here. So hunting occurs throughout the entire process of, invalidation, invalidation, and validation. So we're going to go through it. So hunting manages system entrapment because we know that women know how to manage themselves in a tough situation. They've got it all figured out. They've got the skills. They're doing it themselves. This is a persistent, vigorous search that's not an attack, and this is carried out in isolation. So they seek help for suicidality through a grueling active battle, like it's not an attack, but you know what? Preventing suicide is not the goal. Suicide is almost a second thought. They're seeking to feel human. They're seeking not to feel dehumanized. They're not seeking for help to not kill themselves per se. And I know it kind of sounds like the same thing, but really, when you really split the hairs, you get what's really going on. Hunting is about seeking security needed to remain alive. It's needs-based. It's about taking the power back. Okay, so I'm going to share another quote. After being blamed within therapy for her problems within her IPV relationship and unable to access services for her suicide attempts, this woman defended her right for services when she encountered a service provider. She said, I finally got an appointment and they screwed it up. And I went in and I was angry. And I sat down with the social worker who just kept telling me to calm down. Unfortunately, I was probably being too aggressive with her, that's too bad, but she was being very, very, very mean. And I obviously didn't deserve that because I'm mentally ill and I don't want to be treated like shit. That was more out of desperation. Just like a wolf starving in the woods. Just like I'm so desperate for somebody to see my need for help. That's where I got the idea to use the word hunting. I'm really trying to be very true to their descriptions. I'm starving, I'm a wolf in the woods. I gotta do whatever I gotta do to stay alive here. And that's how they felt it was seeking help. They hunt until a compassionate service provider is found. So, hunting occurs all throughout this process, and do we have, what time do we stop?
I've got about 25 minutes.
Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to, okay, yeah, we need to talk about this. Okay, so with each hunting process, there's many different kinds of hunting depending on what context they're in. Sometimes they got to do it gently to get help, and sometimes they got to not do it so gently to get help. So in each context, they're gauging. It's like the hyper-vigilance that women go through. They're gauging for validation, so let's look at that. They're on the lookout for signs of feeling human versus signs of system entrapment. Constantly assessing the environment, constantly assessing body language, and testing the waters. So if you are seeking to help some women, they're going to be testing you out, just like they do when someone's experienced trauma. They don't have any reason to trust us yet. They have sometimes a gut reaction. Sometimes they're really, really analyzing it and weighing it out. Okay, and hope. If they assess that feeling human is over the horizon, then they'll have hope, which helps them to actually go to a service provider. So once they gauge, this allows them to have a judgment on what they should do, what kind of hunting they should do. This is a harm reduction approach. Unfortunately, there's so much system entrapment. When they go to seek help, they have to take the path of least entrapment. What am I going to do? I've got 3 options. They're all invalidating. What am I going to do? I want help, so I'll take the least terrible one. This is a guide or a map. It minimizes exposure to invalidation during system entrapment. It's a harm reduction approach. I'm going to give you an example of this. Okay, I'm going to give you an example. Okay, distancing from help. This is one of the hunting strategies. So they're going to weigh it out. They're going to weigh it out. They're going to look at trauma entrapment. How much we got here? We got hopelessness. I need help. But then system entrapment. No one's listening to me. I feel invalidated. I fear judgment. If that outweighs my need for help, then I'm going to stay clear of a health provider. I'm going to go out and grasp for help. If the system entrapment is there, there's stigma, I'm afraid of judgment. But if my trauma entrapment is so bad, there's nowhere to turn, I feel really hopeless, I can't do it alone, then they're going to go toward a service provider. Okay, this is where I have an example. So Beth, not her real name, took the path of least entrapment by persisting to wait in the emergency department for a doctor for several hours every day for 2 weeks. Despite hearing the emergency room nurses talk negatively about her at the nurses' station, she could hear them. She decided that it was better than going home and not having a chance to receive medical treatment. She explains her decision by recounting as if she was talking to the nurses, but she wasn't really. This woman had long red hair. Oh my gosh, I remember her. So if you emergency department nurses aren't going to listen to me anyway, and I'm going to sit here and wait for the goddamn doctor to see me, I don't give a rat's ass if you don't believe me, or if you were judging me. As long as I end up getting to see the psychiatrist so he can help me. So I think my will to live and my will to survive is craziness, and that's what it was. Craziness. The will to get better was stronger than having to put up with people judging me in the hospital. The least dehumanizing choice for her was gauged to be grasping for help. The police were oftentimes seen as a very positive way of getting help for suicidality. They were being taken seriously. This shows an example of a broken phone. About 3 women had a picture of a phone in this study out of 7. So this really shows that they need someone to call when they need help. That's basically what they need. They're not asking for a huge program or life to be better or perfect meds, just someone to be there when they reach out. And one woman talks about, she said she called the suicide hotline twice, and the person on the other line told me to deal with it. They said, "You can't attempt suicide, go to the hospital." "Okay, bye. I hope that you don't do it." I get off the phone, I slammed the receiver, and then I walked off. So the direction of the hunt, basically, if they have hope that validation will be there, then they move toward the health provider or the service provider, and if they don't have hope, they move away from it. Okay, now there's one exception here, and I have to talk about this because I gotta talk about this. So sometimes women reach out despite the risk for invalidation, and this is because, like I said before, their trauma entrapment is so high. And do I have? Yes, this is called the applying counter pressure. This is up in the ante. What I've been trying isn't working, so I gotta up the ante. This is what is called oftentimes by attention seeking, manipulating, or acting out. They have to prove their case as if they're in front of a judge. I have to show that I really need help. It's basically an outward display of how they feel. And it has to do with power dynamics. And I'm going to show you an example here. This woman's depression was worsening. She was pleading with the doctor. She was feeling invalidated, didn't have the right meds. She felt deserving of this help, however. So this is how she described communicating the intensity of her need for distress after a suicide attempt when she was in the hospital. And this is her talking to her doctor. It took me a long time to get to my doctor to listen, to make my doctor listen. It took me to take an overdose. And once I took the overdose, that the next couple of days after I was in the hospital, my doctor came to see me and he said, "What's wrong? You look like you're mad." I replied, "Yes, I am. I'm very mad. I'm tired of being drugged. I'm tired of crying. I'm tired of everything. Do something for it." And I was crying and I was screaming and he said, "You're very emotional." And I said, "Yes, I am." So that's all I have to say. Some people look at this and say, "Oh, she was manipulated, plain and simple." But she was willing to die in order to have her needs communicated. So what's the difference? If they die because they're trying to communicate something, or if they die because they just did it alone and didn't tell anybody? It's still a suicide statistic. Okay, so I'm going to go to enduring. Skipping some. Enduring is kind of like keeping the peace in an IPV relationship. You're going to tiptoe around, make sure you don't unsettle the waters, don't want to piss off the healthcare provider. So you're going to do whatever it takes just to get the right kind of help that you're looking for. One woman said, "This picture represents people telling me I had to be strong, solid like a rock, to be able to stand by myself," because that's what we value in our society, being independent, doing it yourself, not relying on others. Don't be dependent. We're told as professionals, don't make them dependent on you. So she said, if I come into the emergency department looking half decent, I'm told by them, "Why are you coming here? You look resilient, you look fine." They're not taking into account that I work really hard to put myself together today. I'm just barely making it. Another woman, oh my, she had cancer twice, as a teen and then again as a young adult. And she said, by far, when I had cancer, I got so much support, so much validation, but with these repeated suicide attempts, I can barely feel like a human being. So, if you put yourself together, you ask nicely for help, then they felt like they were getting better treatment. So, just to recap, okay? When they reached out for help, like I said, for the hotline, they felt like when they asked for help, they were judged and thought, well, they look fine. So when they request help, they felt rejected. When they did what they were told and act nice, and didn't knock on the nurse's kitchen door, didn't demand to be taken seriously that they wanted to kill themselves, they got more help. When they asked nicely, when they tried not to irritate the person that was helping them. "Oh, I see that you're busy today. Do you mind talking to me right now?" Instead of, "I'm drowning here." So what I'm going to do for the rest of the time here is I'm going to show you now what? Tools and interventions. Just like in IPV, We want to prevent physical harm, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. You know, shelters, risk assessments, remove weapons, safety plans, restraining orders, these are imperative. But we also want to promote empowerment. This is the bigger deal. We want health, security, skills, help them with their identity, relationships, trust, self-care, social determinants of health. I mean, let's change this world, for goodness sake. Financial help, childcare, political advocacy, anti-stigma. Just like with suicide, we always want to prevent physical harm. We take away the weapons. We don't want you to scratch yourself. We put you on observations. We watch you every hour. We want to prevent you from dying, and that is the focus for suicide care. Put them in institutions, send you to ER, safety plan, suicide watch. But what we need to be doing more is to promote empowerment. This is the exact same slide as the IPV slide. Health, security, skills, identity, relationships, trust, self-care, coping skills, that's a little bit, it could be the other slide too, policy changes. I want to share a little bit with you a tool I use with women, hundreds of women, and it always helps them. They always identify with it. This is from another study I did. How do people heal from suicidality? If they can increase their ability to feel support, they could have like tens and thousands of people who love them, but if you don't feel it, this doesn't count. And ability to manage their psychological pain, this helps them to connect with hope. And by using this tool, I sit down with them and then we talk about, okay, it's like a jumping off point. I don't know how to help this person. They're begging me to allow them to kill themselves. Like, you know, I want to be woman-led, but what do? I go in with this tool and I say, okay, where do we need to begin? And then they tell me what to do. It's hard to know what to do sometimes. This is another tool that I know is very dense and it's hard to read, it's kind of small, but I can email these out, and this is like kind of a guide to that I developed from the hunting to feel human theory, from women who left an abusive partner who are feeling suicidal. This summarizes it all. So I'm going to go through it bit by bit here. Oh, and this is just saying when I email it to you that this tool is being published with this other study, and I told the investigators that I would put their names up there because it's a collaboration. So, for example, we need to help them to continue with life instead of don't kill yourself. It's all about how can we continue your life. It's like, don't think about a banana. It's kind of impossible. So we want to kind of think about, you know, what are the reasons for living? And also, sometimes when you're working with someone who is so hopeless, they're in front of you. They're not somewhere in a corner killing themselves. So sometimes I just have to squeeze it out. What has stopped you from killing yourself today? And the answer is your intervention. At least for that moment. It's hard work. Connect with resources, of course, and it's okay to ask if you're thinking of killing yourself. You want to know about their method. You want to know about their plan. And it's okay. This is normal to think about these things when you've gone through trauma. And also the desire to escape pain, to kind of validate that, yeah, you know, this is a way of coping, just like alcohol, sure. And to kind of really normalize that we don't have to be ashamed of that. Hope and hopelessness. Hope just isn't about a feeling like, oh, I feel so hopeful about today. It's actually a cognitive process that's goal and future orientated. So being able to look forward to things and faith, of course. But like when we're looking at hopelessness, it's like this low motivation. One way I love, is an awesome tool, it's my go-to, is I want to know how they're functioning in blocks of time. If they woke up today, fine, they didn't kill themselves. Are they functioning in, you know what, I think I'm probably good for the next week, I have a plan, but the next week I'm going to kill myself. Are they functioning in blocks of an hour? You know, and you can ask that, are you just kind of going minute by minute here? In which case, with one guy, I just bounced a ball. That was my suicide intervention at the time. Are they going, you know, year by year, you know, someday I will kill myself. And so that helps you to gauge how much time you have and how much risk there is. I love that, because that would give you a lot of information. So are you taking it day by day, week by week? They'll have an answer for you. It's so weird, because it sounds like a weird question. This is a picture of a woman, a woman's picture of seeking help for suicidality. And this reminds me of another woman who said, you know what, people was always saying to her, maybe you're bipolar. She was leaving an abusive partner and she felt suicidal. She said, I had psychiatrists and psychologists and medical doctors and friends and nurses say to me, are you sure you aren't bipolar? And I said, no, it's not bipolar. It's my life. It's really hard. I need help with the practicalities. I have no support network. I don't need psychological help. Well, I did, but my urgent matters were practical. Getting a lawyer, getting my abusive partner out of the house, getting us separated. And that's the beautiful work you do. Hopefully you're paid very well for it. So it's not just about being labeled. And that's a lesson for psychiatric people. So I'm going to try to listen to that. This is the one I love the most. I've already talked about it a little bit. No, that's not the one. But anyway, being taken seriously, and I'm not going to go through it. We've talked a lot about this, about not judging and empathy. One woman had her daughter take a picture of her from up above on their deck. She said, when you reach out and you say, I'm suicidal, I have anxiety, I have whatever, people look down on you. And that's how she felt. And, you know, I helped this woman at one point. And I remember her not wanting to open up because I kept wanting to talk about problems. And I remember her look at the smile on her face, and she wasn't going to be working with me at all if I kept up that. She taught me something. Okay, deserving. People who feel suicidal feel like they don't deserve help, they feel like a burden. So this is helping them with their sense of belonging. And if we think, okay, what resources should we send them to? Well, you know what? If they're talking to you about suicide, you're it. You are the resource. And by the way you respond, it's going to help her to feel human or be dehumanized. And if you help her to feel human, she's not going to want to kill herself as much. That's how it works. And can we explore the idea it's okay to rely on others? You know, like, I get criticized a lot for, your patients really like you. You must be they're manipulating you. Or, I'll use self-disclosure. I'm in recovery from an eating disorder, and to me, I'm so proud of that, and I'm doing so well. It's okay for me to say that, and they relate to me a little bit because, I also understand trauma and from my past. Doesn't mean I'm going to talk to them about all of the things that have happened to me that I'm not feeling too good about, because that would burden the person. But it's kind of that ability to, it's okay to have that mutuality. It's okay for someone to rely on you. Why are we so obsessed with independence? Helping them to get on their feet. Well, yes, eventually we all want to get on our feet, but in the meantime, it's okay to rely on others. That's how we get on our feet. So helping them to feel deserving. This doesn't have to do with police shackles, but one woman described getting help as feeling controlled. Thought you appreciate that image. Okay, now this is my last one and my favorite one about this unconditional acceptance, what I've already talked to you about accepting that they want to die. It's scary. And God forbid if I ever, well, I have in the past, but if I went home today, my son said he was thinking of suicide. I ain't doing any of this at all. I'm going to be a crazy, crying mother, right? But what we do work toward is the ability to accept them right where they're at. And I know that sounds so cliche. I helped a girl through adolescence until adulthood. And just feeling so frustrated, everyone feeling so frustrated, and she's feeling frustrated. This blonde woman, and had a couple of kids, using a lot of substances to cope. And I'm telling you, I just felt kind of like, where do we go from this? Like, she wanted to talk about one thing and one thing only. There was no homework, there was no giving her therapy, there was no doing all these things that I've studied for. It just felt like banging her head against the wall about, helping her to live. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take a big gulp here, and I'm going to try this. She wanted to talk about how her family wouldn't believe how bad she was. She wanted to talk about how much she wanted to die. She wanted to talk about how she wanted to go right now and go to Shoppers and get the pills, and she wouldn't go away from this. And she kept talking about it, and finally I said, yeah, I can see why you would want to die. You deserve to die. And boys, oh boys, the first time She stopped trying to convince me of something. She started to cry. And then just relaxed. Didn't talk about it anymore for that moment. It solved things. And boys, oh boys, her partner was not happy with me when he found out that I said that. So, it's controversial. I don't know. It's hard. There's no right or wrong answer. But we were able to move on to talk about something else. She didn't feel like dying as much because I got it. It was really scary. And that helps a person not feel so controlled.
What's the like, and this is a big enabler cop talking, that doesn't understand the psychological background or history or the differences. I don't study what is it, the DM, whatever you're.
Oh, that's full of crap anyway.
Yeah, okay. So, is it different for a personality disorder as opposed to somebody who's struggling with a true depression or anxiety?
Really great question, because that's one of the biggest difficulties in the work we do are people with the diagnosis of personality disorder. It's really hard to treat because, well, personality disorders is in the DSM-5, and that is part of the crappiness. For example, when we're talking about suicidality, there's all kinds of personality disorders. You know, sociopath, narcissism, you know, and
Attention seeking.
yeah, those are, right. So the thing is with, I can't speak for everybody, but for women who have experienced this trauma and are seeking help for suicidality, oftentimes they have the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. Attention is basically a label for saying you're a pain in the ass and you're manipulating and you're attention seeking. Well, the whole idea is there's no such thing as attention seeking when we're looking at suicidality. It's a way of getting what we need to get. I'm manipulating all of you by being an animated presenter, because I want you to listen. Am I really manipulating you? You know what I mean? So, you know, they're a wolf starving in the woods. And they're going to, it's the applying counter pressure. I got all the system in track. Maybe it's not your fault as my nurse today, but you know what? I've been abused since I was 3. And I've had it. And, you know, it's applying the counter pressure and they may put it all on you one day for all of the trauma that they've been through for generations even. But it's their way of trying to be validated. And it's their perception. So how is it different from a real depression? Well, you know, that's a labeling thing. People with personality disorders have clinical depression. A lot of people kill themselves and never look depressed. It's all one messy, I can sit here and explain it all out, but the thing is, mental health is about problems with living, regardless of what you call it all. Because one psychiatrist could say this, one psychiatrist could say that. It's just problems with your emotions, having difficulty with thinking, having difficulty with everyday functioning. That's it. And all the rest is just, oh, it's helpful to figure out what medication you might need, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, personality disorders, they get a bad rap. And borderline personality disorder is mostly women. They have chronic suicide problems, and a lot of people say that it's basically just an ongoing PTSD. They've been abused so much, they're, you know, this is triggering. Life is triggering. The way you look at them is triggering them from how they, you know, when their brain was developed as a child. It's like if you have a thing of clay, you know, and the thing that turns, you put your hands on it. What's it called? Pottery. Yeah, wheel. Okay, we're good. Hello. Yeah, so it's like our as children, our brain is like that clay, and life puts our hands in and shapes the clay. Even intergenerational trauma, our DNA, everything, and it changes. And then once the clay dries, when we become an adult, our brain stops growing, it's hardened. And that's how we live our life, being changed with that brain as a child. So if we feel like we're worthless as a child, that's going to stay as an adult. If you guys say to me right now, oh my God, you know, she's not doing it for me, I don't like this presentation, it's going to hurt, but I'm not going to feel traumatized. As a child, I might. So as a child, we keep those ways of thinking as an adult. But there is hope. You know, we can rework that clay. So what I'm saying is people who have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder or these personality disorders and who seem like they're attention seeking, they view the world through a different lens because of that trauma. And a lot of the times, the trauma as a child, their brain is rewired like that. One woman who I work with a lot, she has a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, and she used to cut herself so bad that she would pass out from blood loss. And she explained it beautifully. She said, I feel like I'm a burn victim. If someone says something nasty to you, nice hair, well, that would kill me. It's like, okay, it hurts, but whatever, you move on. If someone criticizes someone with borderline personality disorder, it touches one of their triggers, then it's like a burn victim. This doesn't hurt, it's not burnt. If this was burnt, I would go like this and I would be in agony. So we sometimes think, what are they? They're so sensitive. But there's reasons. Yes.
Well, the woman who came up,
If you don't mind.
I don't mind. Okay, well, what you're saying touches home, because the diagnoses I was talking about earlier was borderline. Of course, so this is super
You're a
relatable.
woman and you were successful.
Yeah, so, naturally. But yeah, the woman who came up with the process of DBT, she's
Oh,
the
yeah.
one who created it.
Linehan.
Yes, so she is quoted talking about they say people with borderline personality are equivalent to having third-degree burns covering like 80% of their body.
Yes.
So, and like this is attributed to the fact that if you have borderline, there's like a saying about flipping your lid.
Yes,
So you
yes.
have like your emotional lid. And then for people with borderline, your lid is kind of stayed flipped open, so you're kind of always in that like feeling emotion no matter what the context says. And making it something like relatable to yourself and your feels. So yeah, it's but you're right, and lately there's become a lot of people who've been diagnosed too. It's becoming almost like one of those go-tos. So
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. This is exactly,
your case study.
well, I mean, I think a lot of us have experienced this, so you're not alone. We have what, 10 minutes or nothing?
5 minutes.
Okay, so we can talk more, but I just wanted to say I've been paying attention. I don't like to hear. And the Maritimes, we don't have anything like this. Like, we're just a little itty-bitty. But I did want to share you part of my world in the Maritimes. This is my parents' cottage that they, I have to share it with them. Anyway, it's my heaven. It's where I go to finally feel like I don't have something to do, and I just thank God for it. This is in Badachois, and it's on the beach right in between PEI and New Brunswick, so it's in the Northumberland Strait. You can see PEI when the tide is out. And I really I hope that you have a place to go to regenerate yourself, because it's scandalous that you guys do this work and don't get paid as much as, the football players. I hope they get paid. They're probably get paid a lot in Canada. Anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to share that. And please, get a hold of me on any social media site. It's been awesome talking to you. I just love this almost as much as air. Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes for questions. Folks have any questions?
Great. Do you mind? Yes, you do, but anyway, who wants to speak into this stuff?
So you said you're from New Brunswick, are you only here just for this presentation?
Yeah.
Or are you from?
No. Yep.
So I was gonna ask if
You do have to ask the questions, but what you're saying is that rapport. You gotta get the trust, or you're not gonna have valid questions. You're not gonna get the answer. You're not gonna get truth. You are right, period.
So I feel the hospital would very much benefit from your presentation.
Well, yeah, they don't listen to me. Where I'm from, now they think I'm a freak. They do. I'm out of there now. But I love it. Loved it. I love it. But they really think that I'm just a dreamer. Yeah. Anyway, that's fine. Oops.
Or even a telehealth conference
Yeah.
or presentation, would that be possible?
Sure, yeah, I'll go anywhere you want to. Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth.
Any other last questions, or running out of time?
For me, it's just kind of correlated to what the result research you are doing on intimate partner homicide. Are any of these kind of journal chapters in it with suicide ideation?
I mean, this is one of the reasons why I want us to be looking more at this. When we look at homicide figures, like the, the extreme victimization of intimate partner violence, we don't count deaths by suicide, right? There are death review committees in 7 provinces. They don't look at suicide, right? For me, it makes really no difference how a person dies in terms of intimate partner violence, whether it's by their own hand or somebody else's, right? There are things that we need to do along the way. And Petrea talked about some of those things, the relationship piece. One of the things that I think, to me, this is an invisible problem. We don't talk about it. I think we don't talk about it just a lot because of the shame piece. The stats that Petrea showed at the beginning, I think, quite shocking. 1 out of 5 women who access shelters are thinking about suicide, right? When we think about suicide, we think of kind of like the end result, right? We don't think of all that suicidal ideation and thoughts and things like that. When I do the work that I do in terms of violence against women, I'm always thinking of unintended consequences, because a lot of times when we try to protect women and try to advocate for women, it ends up backfiring against us and used against us. So I'm thinking, if we could work to look at the connection between suicide and intimate partner violence, what are the negative consequences? And I think about women who may be becoming involved in child welfare, right? So then they've disclosed intimate partner violence and now possibly that they're suicidal, right? Red flags are going off, right? We wonder why women aren't disclosing. Well, women don't disclose domestic violence because they're very fearful their kids will be apprehended. And then they disclose that they're also feeling suicidal. Also a study we're looking at is women involved in, or families involved in the criminal and family court system in cases of custody access where there's domestic violence. Women are being told now across Canada not to report domestic violence in custody and access cases. In fact, there are studies that show that when women do report or disclose domestic violence in family court for custody and access, they are less likely to get custody. Women will not be also disclosing suicide or their thoughts of suicide because they will be looked as if they're deficient, that they can't function, right? And really, when women are talking about suicide from intimate partner violence, that's not about a deficiency, that's about describing the level of violence that they're putting up with, that they have to deal with. That it's that extreme, but I don't think we're looking at it like that. So I just want to thank Petrea to, again, just bringing up this conversation. Like I said, I do this research, I don't hear people talking about it. I'm hoping that this will, encourage you all to think about the connection between intimate partner violence and suicidality. So anyways, I just want to thank you again for coming, for my co-workers for helping me put this on, Cindy for doing all this organizing, and Patricia for doing all the outreach and the promotion and the videotaping, and of course to the staff here at Tommy Prince for letting us share this space. So again, thank you to all of you. We've got a sign-up sheet for the Resolve newsletter, contact list, whatever we can